In presentation 7, I discussed the creation of the lead button. The class 2 ores are mostly sulfides. For a good glassy slag, the sulfides need to be removed or treated. There are 3 methods used to accomplish the treatment of the sulfide ores. In this presentation, I will be discussing the treatment of, the products of, and the optimization of these class 2 ores. Welcome back. I'm Rob Boyko, Boyko Mineral Exploration. The first of the 3 methods are roasting. The 3 methods that will be discussed in this presentation are for those class 2 ores that contain more than 5% sulfide. There are many different sulfides. Zinc sulfide is one of the hardest sulfides to volatilize, that is, ignite. In fact, it is impossible to roast out completely. On the other end of the scale is lead sulfide. It easily fuses and coats any remaining unroasted particles, resulting in a roasting process that will not be fully completed. Ores such as pyrite, galena, or stibnite will yield better results if an equal weight of silica is placed on the roasting dish first. The silica will prevent the roasted products from sticking to the roasting dish. It also absorbs those easily fused oxides. If your sulfide ores contain any arsenic or antimony, that is, arsenides and antimonides, these can be removed by using an alternating oxidizing and reducing process, while adding small amounts of charcoal at intervals. The resulting reduced compounds of these elements are quite volatile and easily ignited. The process is simple. Your weighed samples are placed into roasting dishes and slowly brought up to a temperature of 110 degrees centigrade, while stirring at regular intervals to remove any moisture. Once the moisture appears to be fully removed and the temperature is brought up to roughly 650 degrees centigrade. If your oven does not have a temperature control, the right temperature is achieved when the roasting dishes turn into a low red color. The sample will need to be stirred to break up any clumping and to ensure that the temperature is constant throughout the sample. The temperature is then increased to 700 degrees centigrade and held at that temperature for 20 to 30 minutes to ensure that all or almost all of the sulfides are removed as sulfur dioxide gas. The oxidizing and reducing function is done by adding the charcoal at regular intervals. Roasting must be performed in a well-ventilated area due to the toxicity of the gas expunged. Once the roasting procedure is completed, the samples are further treated as if they were Class 1 ores. The disadvantages are the time requirements for the completion of the roasting process and plenty of muffle space in the furnace. Contamination may take place during stirring, as well as loss due to mechanical action of stirring during the initial roasting. The other important disadvantage is the loss of silver due to volatilization. Silver results will be and usually are low. The second method of treating the sulfide complexes is accomplished by utilizing the litharge-niter fusion process. Throughout the presentations so far, this is the process that has and is still being discussed. It is considered to be the most accurate method used for the pre-collection and collection of your precious and noble metals that are trapped in these sulfide ores such as pyrite, hematite, arsenopyrite, and so on. The sulfides are reduced by oxidating the sulfur constituent with the lead oxide and the potassium nitrate as shown. The sulfur component ionizes and combines with the oxygen, resulting in sulfur dioxide gas, which is expunged. Depending on the sulfide content of the ore, the reducing power of the ore may result in a large lead button, and it usually does. The niter, as previously shown in presentation 7, is used to inhibit the amount of lead produced. The amount of niter is calculated in order to produce the preferred 28-gram button. Extra litharge is used to inhibit the creation of a matte layer. More about matte later in this presentation. When it comes to the Class 2 ores, there is no universal standard laid out charge recipe. It must be calculated. It is difficult to determine the concentration quantities of the constituents of these Class II ores. At times, if the ore has a low reducing power, then flour may need to be used as pointed out in the last presentation. Some of these sulfides may contain contaminants such as tellurium, copper, arsenic, bismuth, antimony, nickel, and cobalt. All these contaminants will require additional litharge in order to have them alloying the slag as base metal oxides, all of which adds additional costs to the process. However, it is still the lesser expensive method used, but a little more expensive than the soda iron method of treatment. There is a difference when comparing soda iron fusion with the other types. The iron component as a flux is reducing. However, it is not controlled or calculated. The lead buttons that are usually produced are larger, about 30 to 35 grams in size. Enough litharge is added to combine with the lead in the ore, if any. That is, if all the lead is reduced, the buttons will be 30 to 35 grams. When the fusion is completed, the slag in any matte formed should be free of any traces of lead oxide or sulfates. It takes a slow fusion, an excess amount of reducing agent, as well as a reducing atmosphere, which is required to inhibit any formation of Fe2O3, which is iron 3 trioxide. This is an artificial form of hematite. The slag itself should be monosilicic or subsilic. More about this classification later. However, the main ingredient of this slag would be soda. Due to the lack of lead oxide, the slag will be less corrosive to the crucibles. During the start of the fusion, the sulfur starts to volatilize. As things heat up, the oxygen from the oxidizing compounds, mainly litharge, combines with the sulfur, producing sulfur dioxide gas. The sulfur will also combine with the iron, forming iron sulfide, which further combines with the soda to form a ferrous sodium double sulfide. The desulfurization is caused by the reaction with the iron rod, nails, powder, or other form of added iron. The iron nails, rods, and or pipes are removed just before the pouring into the cone molds. Depending on the ore type, the accuracy of this method may be scarcely less than the litharge niter process. Gold is not soluble in a ferrous alkaline matte, and silver will dissolve to a very limited extent. This method is not suitable for those ores that contain contaminants that tend to interfere with the fusion. Any sulfide ore that contains copper, tellurium, nickel, antimony, cobalt, or arsenic should not be treated using this method. During fusion, the solid material melts. In essence, this molten material can be considered as a solution. The solutions will separate into layers, with the densest solution forming at the bottom and the lighter solutions forming above. The contents of the crucible can be likened to the solutions sitting in a separatory flask. When cooled, the solutions will solidify, resulting in different layers. Starting with the bottom layer will be the solidified lead button containing the gold, silver, and the platinum group metals, if any. This button should be soft, malleable, and shiny in appearance. It should also be easily removed from the glassy slag. Spice is an unwanted layer. It is an artificial metallic arsenide or antimonide. Antimony spice is rare. The more common is iron arsenate. It is a layer that is produced using the soda iron method of fusion when the contaminant is arsenic. It may also be a nickel or cobalt arsenide. When the slag is broken, the lead button will appear to have a hard, tough tin white coating on top of the button. If the arsenic level was low, the spice may appear as a small little button on top of the lead bead. However, If the arsenic levels are high, this may coat the entire top of the bead. There will be some gold, silver, and if any, some platinum group metals lost in this layer. The next layer, if present, will be matte. Matte is also an unwanted layer. It is an artificial sulfide of metals. It is usually found during a niter fusion of sulfide ore. It forms when the charge is too acidic. It will show up as a blue-gray brittle layer lying just above the lead button. Depending upon the amount of matte formed, it may be a considerable thick layer, or it may be just a granular coating sitting on top of the lead button. Gold and silver are soluble in matte. The result is gold and silver losses, as the lead globules produced during fusion will not collect all of the precious metal due to the formation of the matte constituents. The next layer, which should be the only layer present, is the slag. Slag is the fusible compound of the metallic oxides, silica, and other acidic constituents. It will be a homogenized alloy of silicates, borates from the fluxes added to the charge, as well as the metallic oxides from the ore material. The slag can be considered as a solid solution, commonly referred to as eutectic solutions. At times they can be a mix of chemical compounds. Besides being homogeneous, a good slag must be free of any undissolved ore material. It should be glassy and brittle, more or less that is, and as a molten solution it should resemble a very thin fluid, free from any lead shot. If the slag is too acidic, it will be a thicker solution and stringy when poured. The last few drops from the crucible will form long strings or threads. If it's too acidic, it will be lumpy as it's poured, and shots will break off during the pouring. When cooled and fully solidified, the appearance for a neutral or acidic slag should be glassy. A basic slag will have a dull and stony looking texture. The bottom line is to obtain a lead button which contains all the precious and noble metals without any of the impurities. This can only be achieved if the resulting slag contains all the gangue material. To obtain the desired results, every precious metal assay is calculated. This carefully estimates the quantity of flux material to be added to the ore material for a total fusion and collection. However, it is almost impossible to determine the exact elemental quantities making up the ore material, and therefore a preliminary fusion is usually conducted and the charged material amounts are then adjusted. In regards to the sample, as previously discussed, the amount of material is usually weighed out to around 15 grams. The sample size for optimum fusion is -100 mesh or of a smaller particle size. It is then homogenized with the flux material, meaning that the ore material and the flux material is fully and completely mixed together for a more even melt. To lower the fusion temperature of the charge, 2 or more fusible substances are used. In most cases, that would be the borax and silica. In order to create the almost perfect slag, a ratio between the borate silicate slag and a base is used. Sodium carbonate, commonly referred to as soda ash, is used as the base material, which also aids in reducing the fusion temperature. The slag, as already discussed, must be at the right viscosity, and a low fusion temperature is applied during the initial stages so that the decomposition of the material starts early. This allows for the formation of the lead globules and gives enough time to collect all the precious metals. Near the end of the fusion process, the temperature is increased to superheat the material at about 200 degrees centigrade above the formation temperature of the slag. More in regards to the silicate degree in an upcoming presentation. However, a monosilicate slag is used as reference. As the slag becomes more viscous, as more borax or silica is added. As the borax and silica are acidic, the slag becomes more acidic. The acidity is also dependent on the impurities in the ore. One needs to know which silicate degree to use for the fusion, and is used to calculate the charge constituent. The lead, which is reduced from the litharge during fusion, is in the form of lead globules. The globules must be held in suspension within the slag long enough to collect, that is, alloy with the precious metals, before slowly sinking to the bottom of the crucible, which combine to form the lead button. The decomposition of the ore material must be complete before the temperature reached to the point where the slag becomes very fluid and the lead globules drop out of suspension. If this does not happen, losses will occur and some of the precious metals will be trapped in the slag. As already mentioned, the weight of the lead button should be about 28 grams, more or less. If your lead button produced results in a weight greater than 30 grams, you would need to increase the amount of oxidizing agent, that is niter, to inhibit the creation of the lead, especially when your ore is a reducing ore. If the ore was a class 3 ore, then you would need to reduce the amount of reducing agent. That would be the quantity of flour used. There is another problem that I alluded to. If your lead button is hard and brittle, it would indicate that your button contains some basic metals. In this case, you would need to increase the amount of acidic flux such as silica and borax in order to dissolve the base metal oxides. As I have stated, the slag that you pour into your cone mold should be very fluid-like, low in viscosity, without lumps, etc. If your slag is a bit thick, meaning that it is more viscous than it should be, the temperature of the slag could be a bit on the low side. In this case, the temperature should be increased. However, if the charge was a little too acidic, the viscosity of the melt would increase. If this is the case, then the amount of silicon and borax would have to be decreased, or an increase in the basic flux constituent in order to neutralize some of the acidity. A slag becomes stringy due to an increase in the slag's viscosity. It would be treated the same as a thicker slag. The reason is the slag being too acidic. On the other hand, if the slag showed some lumpiness and the shots were noticed breaking off during the pour, it would indicate that the slag was too basic. Increasing the acidic fluxes or decreasing the quantity of basic fluxes would resolve these problems. During pouring, if it was noticed that there were lumps in the slag and the slag was fluid, the indication is that there was undecomposed ore sample in the slag. Now this may not be noticed. It is best to check the slag when cooled. If the lumps were undecomposed ore, then an increase of acidic flux would be required for decomposition. However, if the lumps were found was actually undecomposed silica, then the acidic flux would need to be decreased. When there is some shoddy lead found in the slag, there are three possible reasons. The first could be the presence of iron oxides, etc., which are infusible at the furnace temperature. That would indicate that additional soda ash is required to further lower the fusion temperature. Due to the ore being oxidizing, the amount of litharge would have to be reduced, and an excess amount of reducing agent would need to be added. The other problem could be that the pour temperature was a little too low, and if this is the case, simply raising the finishing temperature would be in order. The last is just plain human error, careless pouring. A more skillful pouring technique is required. Once cooled, when the button is broken from the slag and some adheres to the button, it indicates that the slag was too acidic, mainly too much borax. An increase in a basic flux or a decrease in the acidic flux would be the intended fix. Matte is that unwanted artificial metal sulfide that forms as a layer just above and at times on top of the button. The formation of this layer indicates that the sulfur constituent has not been fully removed and the base metals did not have enough time to alloy in the slag as metallic oxides. This does happen when the length of fusion time is too short and the melt is poured too early. The fix is simple. Let your crucible contents remain in the furnace longer in duration in order to ensure that all the metallic sulfides are reduced and oxidized. The other problem may be that the sample contained a fair amount of alkaline metal, making the melt a little more alkaline in composition. The fix here would be to increase your basic flux material. It would be recommended to try increasing the amount of litharge. There is one other instance that could cause a matte layer to form, and that is an excessive amount of acidic material, usually silica. All that would be needed is to reduce the amount of silica added to the charge. Once the slag is cooled and the button removed, and during examination you noticed a hard tin white bead stuck to the lead button, no problem, just capel it. On the other hand, if it was coated, then the button would have to be redone in a crucible or scorifier. This ugly coating is a good indication that the ore had a high concentration of either antimonides or arsenides, most likely arsenides or arsenic. In this case, a smaller sample size would be in order. The other indication is that of human error. The soda-iron method of fusion was selected. Ores that contain copper, nickel, arsenic, antimony, tellurium, and/or cobalt should never be treated using the soda-iron fusion method. These ores require the litharge-niter fusion method to be used for the collection of your precious and noble metals. If you're not sure of the constituents of your ore or concentrates, use the litharge-niter method, as it's still the best method to use. Corrosion is not forgiving, and your crucibles will become corroded and unusable in time. If you find that your crucibles are being corroded faster than they should be, or if you find this nice hole in your crucible and a mess on the bottom of your furnace, you would not be the first to experience the losses. This dilemma is due to the fact that your charges may be too basic. Now, if this is the case, then try increasing the amount of your acidic flux. In Part 7, The Fine Art of Fire, I talked about Crucible Fusion. In this presentation, I discussed some of the treatment regarding the ore or concentrate. I discussed some of the optimizations that can be done to enhance the efficiency of the Crucible Fusion. I also mentioned some of the problems that can be encountered plus more. The term optimization was used simply refers to the adjustment that can be made in regards to the charge calculations. In the next presentation, I will be elaborating a bit on your slag formation. I hope that this video copy of this presentation was helpful and informative. If so, please give it a thumbs up, a like, and a share to anyone who may get some benefit from this series on the fine art of fire. I want to thank you for watching. I am Rob Boyko, Boyko Mineral Exploration.